Hi, today we're going to start Chapter 6 on social cognitive theory. Now, as we begin social cognitive theory and learning by observation and modeling, I want you to pay attention to some of the social cognitive theorists' views on how environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. We're going to look at modeling. We're going to look at people's decisions, self-efficacy, and their beliefs about their ability to complete tasks successfully. And we're going to talk about self-regulation skills. Now, you'll remember that a lot of theories are developed in response to other theories, and it's the same way with the social cognitive theory. Some of the general principles of social cognitive theory include the idea that even though many animals can learn by imitation, when we talk about social cognitive theory, we're dealing primarily with human learning. So we're going to be talking about the way that humans learn and the way that they model and observe behavior. First, people can learn by observing others' behaviors and the consequences that result. My husband has always said that he learned what not to do by watching his older brother. He said, I wasn't stupid. I saw what he did and what happened and decided not to do those things. So if you'll remember, behaviorists viewed learning as primarily trial and error. The social cognitive theorists believe that learning takes place by observing the behaviors of others as well as seeing the outcomes of those behaviors or looking at the consequences. The second principle is that learning can occur without a change in behavior. Again, let's go back to our study of behaviorism, and part of that definition of learning was to have a change in behavior. Social cognitive theorists believe that people can learn through observation, but that won't always be demonstrated in their actions at that time. So we may not see an immediate change in behavior, but that does not indicate that the person has not learned. Third principle is that cognition plays an important role in learning. Individuals may observe and understand the response or the consequences, but they may hold on to them and use them in learning behavior not only now but in the future. And the last principle is that people can have considerable control over their actions. When we talked about classical or operant conditioning, this was the idea that people learn by stimuli and response. You know, we could teach a dog to salivate, we could teach a cat to push a certain button, we could teach a chicken or a pigeon to peck at a certain thing. And a lot of this was just a response to the stimuli. But with social cognitive theory, there's a term called personal agency, and this is the idea that people can control their actions. People can see a certain behavior and choose to imitate it or not, and people can actively create or modify their own environments. So, how does modeling and imitation get reinforced? First, the observer is reinforced by the model. For example, if I'm trying to teach a child to do a certain skill, once they imitate it correctly, then of course I will praise them, and that will be um, some of their reinforcement. Another way is that the observer is reinforced by a third person. For example, um, let's say that a boy is imitating Justin Bieber and trying to dress like him. So he is modeling himself after Justin Bieber, but then when the girls respond to that and like that, then that's another reinforcement of that behavior. Another idea is that the imitated behavior in itself leads to reinforcing consequences. And the example they give us here is that a person who imitates their tennis coach's body position when serving may do a better job of serving the tennis ball, and then therefore that is reinforced. Consequences of the model's behavior affect the observer's behavior vicariously, and this is called, of course, vicarious reinforcement. Um, but what happens here is that the observer is watching the model's behavior, and based on the consequences that they observe that model receive, they decide whether they're going to imitate that behavior or not. So if they see a child talk when the teacher's asked them not to, and then the teacher assigns them silent lunch, another child that's observing may say, "Oh, I'm not going to talk without raising my hand because I don't want that same consequence." So, some cognitive factors that are involved in social learning. Remember, we said it's not just stimuli response, but that humans have the ability to make some choices and put some cognition in there. So, we've looked at some of the way that learning occurs through social interactions of modeling and imitation, and now we're going to look at how the cognitive part fits in. First, learning involves a mental rather than a behavioral change. Again, behaviorists were looking for that behavior change as evidence of learning. But as we said, according to social learning theory, people may learn behaviors that they observe, but they don't imitate them right then. They may never act on them, or they may hold on to them and act on them at a later time. The second one is that certain cognitive processes are essential for learning to occur. For example, paying attention, rehearsing, forming mental representations. All of these are cognitive processes that develop at certain times in a person's life. If you've taken human growth and development, and we talk about what children are able to do during each different stage, you'll see that some of these don't develop immediately, so of course they wouldn't have the ability to use those cognitive processes, sorry. Third, the learner must be aware of existing response consequence contingencies. For example, if a person is observing the model, but they don't make the connection between the action and the consequence, then they won't learn from it and they won't know how to correct their actions. And then the last idea is that learners form expectations for future response consequence contingencies. So, as I mentioned in this note, it can be a little bit confusing because it seems similar to reinforcement that we saw in instrumental conditioning, but with social cognitive learning, an expectation of a future reinforcement influences the behavior now. So, if you'll do this, then you can have another cookie. So, that expectation, that incentive, would influence the behavior. Also, learners form beliefs about their ability to perform various behavior. We call this efficacy expectation. And so, somebody may think that they can't do something until let me back up there. Let me explain it a different way, kind of the way I typed it out. An individual would understand, let's go back to the tennis player. They would understand how they needed to stand, what they needed to do to be able to serve the ball, but they don't believe that they can do it. And so that lack of confidence may cause them not to even try, or may cause them not to perform up to their ability because they don't believe that they're able to do that. So we see that these efficacy expectations can influence the cognitive processes that underlie learning. For example, I work with students, and I've got a fifth grader that is not doing very well in school. Can't get them to pay attention, can't get them to complete homework, can't get them to turn in homework, even if they do it. but he has no anticipation of a payoff for learning it. He has already been held back. He doesn't really see himself doing much in the future except joining his dad and uncle in construction, and so he doesn't see any payoff or any reason to sit in school all day every day, and for sure not to do, the homework. So this can greatly affect or influence, his learning. The non occurrence of expected consequences is an influential consequence in and of itself. If you look on page 116 of your book, you see the definition of outcome expectations. And this is a hypothesis, but what it supposes is that a person forms certain ideas about the results that future actions are likely to bring, and then when they're not met, we see a very strong emotional response. Let's just continue talking about children. If they think that if they do something, then they're going to get a treat or a prize, and then they don't, we may see them throw a temper tantrum. This may become more serious as we get older and we see maybe a student who did a job and expected to maybe be paid and then they weren't, or maybe they studied really, really hard and didn't do well on the test. They can become very emotional or express strong emotions about not receiving the anticipated outcome. So, how does modeling affect behavior? Remember, modeling is the observation of another person's behavior. First, modeling can teach new behaviors. People can learn entirely new behaviors by observing others perform them. Think about, football teams watch the films. People who really want to be good at a certain thing may watch videos of it over and over. And so this modeling can teach new behaviors. Modeling also influences the frequency of previously learned behaviors. People tend to increase or decrease their behaviors based on how they see other people treated when they exhibit that behavior. And two things occur. We may have facilitation of the behavior, which occurs through the vicarious reinforcement, or we may have inhibition of the behavior, which occurs with the vicarious punishment for the behavior. Modeling may encourage previously forbidden behaviors. This disinhibition effect may occur when an individual sees a model being reinforced for behavior that had been previously learned but forbidden. So maybe you were taught that a certain thing was wrong, or this would happen if you did a certain thing, and then when you get out of your home and meet other people, your world gets a little bit bigger. You may see somebody doing something that was forbidden to you, and they don't have the consequence that you thought that there would be. I think we may see this a lot more now through the internet, because people can see or learn about behaviors that they would have maybe never even thought about doing before. And then lastly, modeling also increases the frequency of similar behaviors. And the author of our book tells us on page 120 that when a person observes a model performing a particular behavior, the person may display similar rather than identical behavior. So what makes an effective model? There's three general types of models that have been identified in relation to social learning theory. We have live models, symbolic models, and verbal instructions. And these three all have something in common, and that is for them to be effective, they need to have at least one and hopefully more of these characteristics. The model needs to be a competent model. The model has prestige and power. The model behaves in stereotypical gender appropriate ways, and the model's behavior is relevant to the observer's situation. What are some behaviors that we can learn through modeling? First, we can learn academic skills. This is called cognitive modeling, and the process of cognitive modeling can help students learn academic skills. In this process, the model demonstrates not only how to do, but also how to think about a task. So, hopefully, a good teacher would break down a task, not only telling the student what to do, but kind of what to think and what they're working towards as they do that task. Second way it can be learned is through aggression. According to studies, children and adolescents become more aggressive when they observe aggressive or violent models. As you continue through this module, you'll see a video of Bobo the Clown, and this was a test that was done or a study that was done to try to prove this theory. And third, we can learn interpersonal behaviors. Individuals can learn many interpersonal skills by observing and imitating others. Um, you may have been in a social situation where there was 10 forks and you didn't know which one to use, and so we watch and see what the other people, which fork they pick up and use or something. So we can learn some of those skills by observing how other people act in certain situations. So what does it take for modeling to occur? First, the observer must pay attention. To imitate a behavior accurately, a person must pay attention to the model and to, some of the specific or significant aspects of the behavior. Secondly, once they've paid attention, it's important that they retain what they have observed. There's a couple of ways to do that. First, maybe rehearsal, repeating it over and over and over, what to say, what to do, the order of things, whatever it may be. And then another method that's very effective for some people is using memory codes. These are verbal or visual labels or images that are used to remember information. I know when I would help my students, or not my students, my children, help my children learn states and capitals, or even learning vocabulary words or spelling words, might come up with silly clues, or think of a funny picture that goes with the word to help them. And this is an example of using memory codes. Another way for modeling to be effective would be through motor reproduction. Successful modeling requires that an individual actually perform the behavior that's been demonstrated. In some cases, this can't be possible because the person does not have the ability to perform and observe behavior, and they also have to be given the opportunity. So they may see a behavior that they want to imitate, but if they don't have the opportunity, um, I'm thinking about maybe a sport and they don't have access to a basketball court or a ball or a soccer field or something, then as much as they've watched it, or watched it on TV or watched a video or observed it, they don't have the necessary equipment or facility to perform the behavior. And finally, motivation. Learners must want to demonstrate what they've learned. And remember that self-efficacy, that was an important aspect of motivation. As we talk about self-efficacy, I want you to know the definition is a person's belief that they are able to successfully perform a behavior. Now, it's not self esteem, it's not self concept, even though it's very close, but efficacy refers to the belief or the lack of belief that they can do something. And if you've worked with children, you have probably seen this. What they're willing to try, what they're willing to kind of risk and take a chance on. And so when we're talking about self efficacy, we see it in the choice of activities. People tend to choose tasks and activities at which they believe they can succeed, especially as they get a little older and self conscious. If they don't think they're going to be good at it, a lot of times they won't even try. Goals. People tend to set higher goals for themselves when they have high self efficacy. Again, if they don't feel like they can do it very well or be very competent, they may set their goal a little lower. Effort and persistence. People with a high sense of self efficacy are more likely to exert effort when they work at a task, and they're more likely to persist when they encounter obstacles. And that's kind of common sense. Think about this. Um, if I don't think I'm going to go do good on something, then I may not give it 100% because I don't want to look foolish when I fail. Or if I've had to be coerced into trying to do something that I don't really think I'm good at, then the first time I mess up or the first time I can't do it, then I just give up. I knew I couldn't do it. And then the last one, learning and achievement. People with high self efficacy tend to learn and achieve more than those with low self efficacy. And this is just kind of a combination of all the previous points we've talked about. They try harder, they persist longer, they use better study skills, and they just have that overall belief that they can do this, and that keeps them moving forward. How does a person develop self efficacy? This sounds like something that we would all want. We would all want it for our children, and we would all want it for our students and things. So, ways that they develop it is through previous success and failures. Looking at their own history of successes and failures seems to be one of the most important factors in developing self efficacy. Their current emotional state. If somebody is really depressed or feeling down or anxious, it may diminish or affect their feeling of self efficacy. Messages they receive from others. Um, can they do the people around them believe in it? In some cases, we found that a learner's self efficacy can be improved when other people praise good performance, not goof, good performance, or assure them that success is possible. You can do it, that encouragement. The successes or failures of others. If they watch their peers, maybe they watch a real inspiring movie. I'm thinking of Rudy, but kind of the underdog, but they struggle and they succeed, then they have a coping model, and this can help them develop self efficacy. And then the success and failures of the group as a whole. When they work in a group, then it's not all on their shoulders. And so sometimes people do better at when they work in a group, especially if that group achieves success. Let's talk a few minutes about self-regulation and what is involved in the development of self-regulation. Um, we don't see self regulation in very young children. It's just not there yet. But as they grow, some of the things that'll be involved in self regulations would be the setting behaviors and goals, self observation, self evaluation, self reaction, and self reflection. And you can see the definitions of each of those terms on this slide. How do we promote self regulated behavior? Through self instructions. We can have learners repeat the instructions over and over to guide their behavior. We can do self monitoring. This would be where we have people monitor their own behavior. Sometimes we have them keep a log or keep a journal, write down every time they do a certain thing. Or you could just have them pay closer attention to their behavior and just be aware. Self reinforcement, this would be the act of giving yourself a treat or a special privilege when you behave in a certain manner, or withholding reinforcement with you when you don't. And then self imposed stimulus control. And the idea behind this is that we increase the desired behavior by seeking out an environment where the behavior is most likely to occur. Study in the library, turn off the TV, put your cell phone away, and those types of things. Or we can decrease an undesired behavior by engaging in the behavior only in certain situations. We only eat when we're sitting at the table. Therefore, we don't just pick up cookies and different food here and there and walk around and eat it to kind of regulate our eating.